Folks, my name is Bob Wells. I'm 89 years old. I've been a resident of Ansted for 84 years, and it's been my privilege during this 84 years to meet a lot of the old residents of Ansted, and I tried to learn from them some of the things I'm going to try to tell you all here tonight. Ansted was incorporated in 1891. The first mayor was Colonel M. Bowden. He came in here after the Civil War and married one of the Tyree girls. He was out at the Tyree Tavern. And I think later years she died, and I believe his second wife was a Dickerson. He was quite an entrepreneur. He built a lot of these buildings here in Ansted, and a lot of the brick buildings down on the lower end of Ansted, which are gone now, but I think he was the one that probably built some of those. Ansted was named after David T. Ansted, who came over here back in probably 1870, and he was a geologist from England, and he came to Ansted here and found out there was an abundance of coal here. So his company in England sponsored him, and that's when Captain Page came in here as the superintendent of Golden Mountain Coal Company, built the Tyree Tavern that you all see as you're going out of town here, built the Page Vodder House, and he lived there, built that in 1891. I think he lived there probably until 1917 when he left and went to Washington. And the superintendent came in was a Mr. Morris, and it was my privilege to meet him. I knew Mr. Morris. And he lived in the house over there that was formerly occupied by Guy Dooley. The company built that for him. And I have a picture here in case some of you haven't seen it. This is our, can you get that picture there all right? That's David Ansted. Okay. And the bank down here, the Ansted Bank, it was called the Ansted National Bank until 1930 when the Depression was changed. It went out of business then. And it's sitting on the corner down here, and the town of Ansted has their town hall in there. It was built in 1908. That's when and it was made of cut stone. And I've been told that the Giannulo family from Fayetteville, who were stonemasons from Italy, came over here and built that building and all the stone walls out here in front of the old Ansted High School down here. And here's a picture of Ansted, 1906. And here's what it looked like in 1962. And here's, I want to show you this. I was talking about him. I don't know whether you can get that. That's Colonel M. Bowden. He was the first mayor of Ansted. Can everybody see that? Got it? Okay. Now, to all you young lads, people here that don't remember this school, this is where me and my sister went to school. Some of you all may have went there. This was the first school. It was built in 1912, and the principal was H.B. Carden. He is one of the writers of the Fayette County history, wrote in 1925. And that 1925 Fayette County history is very hard to find. They're very scarce. But it certainly is a great book if you get a chance to read it. And Mr. Carden was a schoolman. He taught from 1912, 1916 out there. The grade school was on the bottom level. The high school was on the top level here. And he was, like I say, he helped write the Fayette County history. But let me tell you who he was. His sister was Granny Taylor, who was the postmistress here in Ansted for 40 years probably. I don't know whether you all remember. I know my sister remembers. Some of you may remember her. But anyway, him and Mr. Peters wrote this Fayette County history in 1925, and if you get a chance to read it, it is certainly great. But that's what the school looked like. In 1925, the Ansted High School was built up here on top of the hill at a cost of $45,000. Can you imagine that? It'd be $10 million today, but nevertheless, and Lee Massey's father-in-law lived right across from Manion's store here. He was the stonemason there, and the brick mason, and it was built in 1925 for $45,000. Unimaginable in this day and time now. But anyway, this gentleman right here is Mr. Martindale. He had the drugstore down here in town. The lower end, the brick building was tore down here when he put the road through. He was the father of Dr. John Martindale, who was a dentist here in the early 1900s. This gentleman you're looking at here right now is Dr. L.O. Fox. He was a doctor here in Ansted probably for 50 or 60 years. Let me get this around here so you all can see it. Can you see, Maury? He and his father were both doctors, Dr. George Fox and Dr. L.O. Fox. And they were also the Ford dealer here in Ansted from the early 1910, 1920s up until to the World War II, when they were allowed to make automobiles in 1942. And he closed the business up. And in 1945, my dad came up there and opened this business in 1945. And we were there until 1987. But Dr. Fox lived until 1950. And I put on Facebook here a while back a question of how many people did Dr. Lori Fox deliver. And it was unreasonable, how many people here in Ansted who he had delivered in. This building that you're looking at right here now is one of the buildings that Dr. Martindale, that was his building right there. Can you see that, all right, girls? Okay. Does anybody remember Ramsey's Hardware, or Ramsey's Restaurant? Y'all remember that, can't you?
Yep.
Can anybody remember Eva Claiborne's store down there? Okay. Does anybody here remember that there was a Kroger store in Ansted, West Virginia?
Yes. A Kroger?
A Kroger store. Let me show this here. Here's a picture of it. There was a Kroger store there, and the manager of that Kroger store was Mr. Lacey Gilkerson. After the war, you couldn't get bananas during the war. And after the war, sometime in 1940s, late 46, 47, he called my dad at the garage and said, Lacey said, would you send Bob down here? He said, I have something I'm going to give him. And he had 3 bananas. You couldn't have given me $10,000 anymore more than those 3 bananas were to me. But he was a very nice guy. He ran a store there. I think they probably sometime in the late 50s they went out. Now here is a picture of Main Street, Ansted, West Virginia, 1942. Can you see all that? Okay.
If you'll allow us to, when we finish up, they can take shots of all your pictures.
They surely
and we'll
can.
Post them on Facebook on the.
Here's a picture of Mr. Page I was telling you all about there a while ago. He was the superintendent of Gully Mountain Coal Company from 1873 to 1917. And all of you have heard of the Vodder family. I am sure all of you have heard of these Vodders. This was the old granddaddy of all the Vodders. His name was John Vodder, and he was the manager of the Gully Mountain Coal Company store down under the bridge. When Mr. Page left, Mr. Vodder moved into the Page Vodder house, and that's where he lived until the Potter family sold it. Back down below the company store, you'll have seen this new building that the town built down there, haven't you? Does that look familiar? That's the way it looked in the old days, 1910. The fellow that's there with a horse and buggy there is Paul Massey's dad, Jim Massey. And he had a shuttle service from down at New River, Hawks Nest to Ansted. He delivered freight and stuff up to the freight station there. Anytime y'all got a question, now break in. Here's the old original bridge in Ansted. Y'all remember that?
I remember the trucks that weren't used to that curve. The trucks coming through town, the curve, they weren't used to that. And you hear those brakes. Yeah, you hear those brakes going.
In 1925, the Masonic Lodge in Charleston, West Virginia, came in here and bought several acres of land where the Hawksness Lodge is now situated. And they came in there and built a building which was later called the Masonic Building. It's not the real clear picture, but that's what it looked like. And they went, when the Depression came in, they owed more debt and they lost it. So somebody bought it up. But nevertheless, it was tore down in 1965 to make room for the Hawksness Lodge. Any questions on that?
Well, you
There's
need to
one
tell
of our-
what they used that building for.
Do what?
You need to tell what they used that building for.
Well, yeah, that building, after the lodge went out and someone had bought it, when I was a kid down Lover's Leap, they had a skating rink in there because it had good hardwood floors throughout. Then they had song conventions came in there. And in 1956, Roy Acuff came in there on his bus and his entourage and had a big session down there. That was 1950.
So that was a big building then.
Yeah, big. It was great.
Because to have a skating rink,
It had on all four corners. It had the place where they had the spotlights and everything. And some of you all may remember this fellow right here. Does anybody here remember that guy standing in front of the building? That's my dad, 1951. Did someone ask a question?
No, they was telling me something.
Lester Flat and Earl Scratch was down here at that building.
Yeah, there was several groups came into that building, and now let me tell you about this fella here. You see this gentleman, this colored man right here? His nickname was Crazy Willie. His name was William Huddleston. He wasn't crazy. He was a nice colored man, and he loved kids. And every time he came to Ansted, you go down the street, kids would be gathered around this old colored fella, and he'd be telling them the yarns and stuff. This picture at the bottom right here, I don't know whether you can get in on that or not.
He peeked in windows too.
Do what?
He was a window peeper.
Oh, was it? Oh, I didn't know that. This picture down here at the bottom, can you see it there? That is where Hawks Nest State Park is built today. When that picture was made, that was probably sometime in the early 30s or late 20s. And I knew the fella who ran that. He had animals, wild animals in those cages down there. And back as you go around to the Hawks Nest Rock, that round place on top of that hill was a hotel. And the fellow that run that was a fellow by the name of, he was a janitor up here at school when I was up there. His old man, I can't think of his name right now. These names get away from me.
It'll come to you.
Are they supposed to come get away from you when you're 87 years or 89 years old?
Sometimes you have to be that old.
His name was Fred Ollinger. It came to me now.
See?
This picture here is a picture of the 19 and 26 and 27 football team, Ansted. And let me tell you where it came from. The retired school principal up here by Merle Poodle Cavendish. This is one of the original, he gave this to me, and he was on that football team. And you're not gonna believe it. There was 12 people on that team, and I knew 10 of them. They were still living when I was a kid. Well, now I've done all the talking. What would you all like to ask me?
Do you remember when they tore the old school down, the elementary school, and built the new one?
That was 1951. And there was a hill school on the other side of the bridge here where the cut stone house is. It was built in 1889, and I went to the 7th and 8th grade there, and they discontinued probably sometime in the 50s.
So back in your day, do you think most children finished all 12 years of school, or did a lot of them have to drop out and go to work and go to the farm?
There was a lot of them in my freshman class. We started out with 96 kids in our freshman class, and 55 of us finished.
Not half. That's not bad.
96?
Do
You
what?
say 5
No,
out of
no,
96?
55.
Oh, okay.
So almost half. That's
Yeah.
not bad for back in those days, because a lot of times the kids.
Well, a lot of them had to go to work.
Yeah.
It'd be surprising to talk to some of the old coal miners here in Ansted, the 12 and 13, 14-year-old kids that were working in the coal mines back in them days too.
How about that school, the first school? The first graduating class was not very big, was it? Like,
The first graduating class was I believe it was 1914 or 15, and I should have brought it. I have a picture of the graduate. It's in this book right over here. The graduating class of 1921, and I knew 5 of the 6. I knew 5 of the 6. They were still.
I think my Aunt Eula.
Yeah.
Was one of
Oh
them.
yeah.
So you were talking about the car dealerships. Do you remember when the first cars started coming through the area?
When what?
When the first cars started coming through the area, when it was starting to get common to see people driving?
After the war,
After the war?
1946, 47.
Yeah. Was Route 60 still a dirt road, or had they paved it by then?
It was paved.
Okay.
Oh yes. And I may tell you, there were several car dealerships in Ansted back in the early 1900s. The business where my dad had his agency there was owned by the Fox and Fox. That's Dr. Lohr and his brother, and that started sometime 1910. And across the road here, where the antique shop was right across over here, that was a car dealership. He sold Chandler automobiles. His name was Leslie Thomason. And on out to where the Fayette County National Bank is, Holly Neal's great grandfather had a car agency out there, and his name was Judd Warren. And I'm sure there's probably some more that I didn't know about. Those are the 3 that I knew about. Well, the line came along. He came along in 19 and after the war.
Mm-hmm.
The funeral home, Mother's, it used to be that old, like ambulance. If you needed an ambulance, it come from the Wallace funeral home.
Yeah, well, it was.
My dad said when you loaded an ambulance, it took you to the funeral home.
Yeah, they wasn't of these ambulance services they got now. It was the ambulance was owned by the funeral home, and that's who took you to the hospital. Or
Well, it was dual purpose. You went one place or the other.
yeah, they either took you to the hospital or to the morgue.
So talking about the first cars that came into the area, how about the first tractors?
First what?
First tractors? Do you remember when you first started seeing tractors come into the area?
the first person that I remember having a tractor was Mr. Lacey Gilkerson, the fellow I was telling you about that was at the Kroger store. He had one where the steering wheel was offset. You know, the new modern are in the center, but this was an offset. It had them wheels was that tall on it. But that's about the first farm tractor I remember seeing.
About when would that have been, you think?
Oh, probably it'd have to be close after the war, sometime 46, 47.
Yeah. My people were farmers in North Carolina, big farmers. And my grandfather bought the first tractor that ever came into Iredell County, North Carolina. And when they take their lunch break, he used to bring it in out of the field and park it in the front yard so people could drive by to look at it. They'd drive a long way just to come put their eyes on that thing. And before that, they worked big old mammoth mule teams. So I'm telling on myself now, but that was a big deal when they went from
I'm sure
horses
it
to
was.
tractors.
Yeah.
So when Mr. Ansted came into this area and found all the coal, how long was that after the big timber cut? You know, when they pretty much clear cut the mountains here.
Oh, that was a long time before.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
This is all second growth.
oh,
All the trees.
oh yeah. I'm
They
sure.
they clear cut these mountains. There was nothing.
It was that's been a long time. That was
Mhm.
way after him.
Yeah.
And you know, back when I was a kid, before I was born, the chestnut tree was very, very popular in West Virginia. But there's some kind of a disease came through and killed all the chestnut
Mhm.
trees. But I have seen houses here in Ansted people had tore down and there was chestnut lumber in them.
I've got chestnut logs
Yeah.
laying all over my
Yeah.
woods, and they're still solid.
Yeah.
And they've got to be 250 years old.
I'd say.
And you can put the chainsaw in them. About that much of it's doty, and the rest of it still could go to the sawmill today.
I'm sure. Well, what else do you want to ask me?
So back in those days, did people grow most of their food?
Yes,
So everybody
sure
raised a
they
big
did.
garden.
everybody had a garden. Believe me, my mother and dad had a big one, and I had to hoe corn, and I hated that. But you know, Gene and I have been married for 65 years. Other than the time that I was gone in the Army, we raised a garden until I got to where I couldn't walk good. So for probably 58 years, she and I raised a big garden every year. And Judy did too right here. Phyllis did. I'm sure some of you all did, or your family did. But it was, you know, back in them days, if you needed a garden to supplement your food.
Yeah, well, that's what I was wondering. People that worked in the mines and they had a tight schedule. They worked all the time. Did they still grow a garden?
They certainly did. They'd come in from work. Just say, for instance, they would work at the Gully Mountain Coal Company. They would start to work at probably 7 o'clock and get off at 3. They would come home and probably eat supper and go work the garden.
Yeah.
But not only them, but it wasn't just one person worked it, the whole family did.
You know, a lot of people, what they don't think about back in those days, we've lost so much knowledge, which is part of the reason why we're wanting to do this. They knew exactly how many pounds of potatoes they needed to plant to get through till the next year for a family of 4 or a family of 6 or a family of 10. We'd just be guessing. And if you didn't guess right, you'd be hungry by the time the potatoes came in the next year.
Exactly right.
But they knew exactly what to plant to carry them through, not only for the garden to come in the next year, but be ready to harvest. So you got to add another 4 months onto the planting before everything's ready to can. And that's another thing. Hardly anybody had electricity, so they had to preserve their food in lots of other ways. We don't have those skills now. We couldn't put it in a jar and can it, or had a freezer to put it in. How many of y'all think you could put up a year's worth of food and be sure it'd be good for a year and have enough and I've got a lot of skills, but I couldn't do that. I'd be guessing how many pounds of potatoes to plant to feed a family of four. So,
Well, would you believe that Gene and I still can?
yeah,
And I'm sure some of you do.
yeah.
Uh,
Unfortunately,
we
I
were
didn't
taught
kindle
the
my
kids
freezer
how to
a
do
lot.
it. Everybody knew how to can, and everybody knew how to work a garden too.
Survival.
Oh yeah, well, there were a lot of different reasons. A lot of it was financial. They couldn't afford to go to the store and buy every little thing, and I guess it was just the way it was. You didn't have stores to run to or a way to get to the store. You know, when you got to hitch up the mule and go, and it takes 3 hours to go 12 miles, you don't go every day.
True.
I mean, can you imagine what a trip it was to have to go to the Capitol for something? It'd take you a week to go down there and back with a horse and buggy.
Well, I think about the people who lives over in Ramsey, West Virginia right now. There was one way out of there, and I don't know whether any of y'all know this, but the only way you get out of Ramsey, West Virginia was go up Shade Creek, cross the mountain. The road's still there, part of the road's still there. But that's how those people got out of Ramsey and Leander. They had to.
That's why people joke and say, well, I never saw this or that till I was 20 years old and left
Yeah.
the hollow. Well, you
That's
didn't
true.
go nowhere back in those days because it was an ordeal to go.
You went to the store, church, go to church, and went home.
When they start bringing in utilities like water and stuff,
Do what?
the utilities like water and stuff, when did they start bringing that through?
True.
When did they bring it in?
When did it bring it in? Here?
Yeah.
Water.
The original water system came into Ansted probably in 1936. That's the old original of the water plant down here. And they patched around on it for probably 40 years. And then the West Virginia Water bought this and put all this new water system through here.
Well, that's just like power. I mean, most of the outlying farms and houses, they didn't have electricity for a long time, did they?
It's true.
What do you think the time frame was on that when they finally had everybody kind of hooked into the electric system?
Well,
50s?
I was raised on a farm up in Greenberg County, and we didn't have electricity. We had the oil lamps.
Yeah. So when did y'all get electricity?
We moved here from there in 1941, and I believe I'm sure we had electricity then. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something we'll all desperately miss if it ever goes down.
You're
That
right.
electricity is a nice thing. Be able to flip the switch and have lights after dark and a freezer and refrigerator. That's about the only thing I'd probably miss is my electricity.
We're a
Be hard-
spoiled
Oh,
generation, aren't we?
yes, we are. Absolutely. The American people have got to be the most spoiled people on this planet. We've really been blessed, and I don't think most people realize the adjustment it would be to try to survive without all these modern conveniences. It'd be no picnic, that's for sure. I always say if you live in a third world country, they're not even going to notice too much has changed because they'll be like, oh, you mean the power's been off over the United States for 3 months? Because they didn't have it anyway, so they're not going to miss it, but boy, we will.
Well, we're very fortunate to have lived in this great country.
Yes.
And I think that God spoke this country into existence 400 years ago, and He put something called love in the American people that a lot of these people don't have overseas.
Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, when people are struggling, it's much easier to be kind and gentle and loving and sharing when you've got plenty, but when everybody's scraping, it's a little bit harder to find that gentle path. when times are hard, people get hard.
You're right.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody back there got anything they want to ask?
You was talking about the one way out of Ansted, old Centerview Road. My grandfather was the mail carrier, carried it all the way from Leander, where the old coot school was. Carried it all the way around to come up across Mountain Shade Creek.
That was the main route out of there back in them days, yeah.
Grandpa Hopkins,
He
Grandpa
carried
Hawk.
horseback,
horseback and wagon, depending on what they had to deliver.
depending on where he was going
There
that
was
day.
8 post offices in that, what is it, 8, 10 miles from Leander to Shade Creek.
Because it had to be close to where you lived. People wasn't gonna go 10, 12 miles away to get their mail. They didn't go that far.
Well, he would probably come to Garland Moore's store at the Victor Post Office and pick up the mail there, take it back across the mountain, I'm sure, the way he done that probably.
And each post office had the old stove, and you put bricks on it. And you leave home with hot bricks in the floorboard of your wagon that burn up sacks over. When you get to the first stop, post office, trade them bricks out, go with new bricks, and that's how they went. My mom, Jessie Carter, you know them.
Oh, yes,
My
I
dad's
know.
mom for years. And she was, rode with me a few times on some of those trips.
Very
Some of
interesting.
those power poles in the country. First pole up our holler is in the 20s.
That was early, wasn't it?
The lines was put in, but the people didn't have the money to sign up for the power. They had a race for areas in the power line. So they put power lines everywhere. But not everybody asked for power.
Yeah.
Well, that's just like you talk about being spoiled. Most people back in those days, heating your whole house was unheard of. You had a wood stove in the kitchen that you cooked on, and that was the only room in the house that had heat. So you jump up in the morning and run to the kitchen and
I'd say, though, the thing is, though, not a one of us here
no.
would want to live like they did.
You know, talking about heat, of course, along came the warm morning stove then. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
You girls don't remember that, do you? The warm morning stove? That's what it was called, the warm morning
Did
stove.
most people around here at that time, did they heat with coal or did they heat with wood?
With coal.
Because the woods was kind of all cut down and
Yeah, they,
small growth, so
well, they was people that had what we call punch mines.
yeah,
back
coal
then.
was abundant. So
And they would bring it up here, up the Ansted Holland people
Mhm.
would buy it up there.
yeah.
You know, I haven't talked about the museums here at Ansted. And I meant to, that slipped my mind. I wanted to compliment this young lady, Holly, over here. If you haven't been down and seen the Ansted Museum under the old town hall, you got a blessing just to go in that place. She has done a tremendous job.
There's a basement under that building.
It's under the town hall, up this side of the clinic.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah. And also the contentment down here.
Mm-hmm.
They have some of the most valuable things in there that unbelievable. The things they have in there. I believe I mentioned it. Colonel Imboden had married this Dickerson lady, and if I'm not mistaken, she has her. They have her wedding dress down there. Have you been through there?
Mm-mm.
And her waist is
Unreal.
about this big.
Oh my goodness.
Do what?
You know, that's true. My mother, when I was 11 years old, 10 or 11 years old, I could not zip up her wedding dress because the waist was so small.
Yeah.
And I was just a skinny little kid. I mean, knobby kneed, skin and bone, skinny thing. Couldn't zip up her wedding dress because her waist was so tiny.
Yeah.
Women back those days were built different.
Did they wear the stays to cinch their waist in?
I don't think she had any boning in it or anything. If I remember, it was just a regular boy. I mean, she must have had like maybe an 18-inch waist. Cause I'm telling you, I was a tiny, skinny little girl. I mean, I was always little, and tried that thing on and couldn't even zip it up. And I wasn't 10 or 11 years old. I mean, I wasn't even grown yet. So
They didn't need all the junk we use.
no. But if you look at pictures, they were just built different. They all had that tiny little waist.
Yeah, and they all had to work too.
Because they didn't eat as much. I mean,
They had to do manual labor, all of them did too. Not
well,
only
they
cooking,
certainly were sitting around
cooking and
snacking
taking
all
care of the
time.
kids, but they worked the garden and everything else.
Yeah, yeah.
What about hospitals? What was like, when did they have a bigger hospital? When was it built in this area that you could go to, like Oak Hill or something? I mean, the people had their babies at home, they did most
They
everything.
had-
They said you had a doctor come to your house even.
You know, Dr. Fox, I was telling you about him. Let me tell you the story about babies. Back in 1847, 48, I could drive a car real well. I had no driver's license though. And everybody was gone. Doc didn't have anybody to drive, so I was the one that ended up driving him. And believe it or not, I've been with him when he delivered babies. He delivered them at home. It was nothing
Yep.
unnatural to do. They just wouldn't know. The nearest hospital was Montgomery or maybe Oak Hill. But these women, they would hold on until Doc got there.
I've talked to some ladies, older ladies that said that when they were born, they were actually put either like in a dresser drawer. That
Yeah.
was their crib.
Yeah,
You know.
that was pretty common. It was warm anyway.
Yeah.
They closed the baby up, and that body heat was enough to keep it warm. I'm thinking the first hospital was down in Montgomery, wasn't it?
I think so.
They
Yeah.
built that one first before
Laird Memorial Hospital, the
Mhm.
Laird family.
Yep, yep.
Probably took a little while to get there.
There was a lot of doctors in Fayette County history to tell you
Nobody
about.
wanted
This
to go to
town was
hospital
full of
anyway
doctors back in the early 1900s. A lot of them.
Back in
Yeah.
those days, you didn't go to the hospital unless your leg was cut off. I mean, you just didn't go. It wasn't like now where people think it's a good place to go. You had to be at death's door to go to the hospital. And then part of that was financial. People didn't want to go into debt for having to go to the doctor and go to the hospital, but a lot of it was just,
When you did go to the hospital, these women, if they had a baby, you had to spend 5 days.
yeah.
I'm gonna tell a story about. I was stationed at Fort Stewart, Georgia, and Jean was pregnant with her daughter Cindy, and I took her to the hospital, and she was there 5 days. Of course, being in the Army, I didn't have to pay any doctor bill, but I had to pay her
Room and board.
her food bill.
Yeah, yeah.
$1.05 a day. It was $5.25. And I waited until my daughter got to be she was married and had kids. She was in her late 50s. I handed her that bill. I kept it all in the room. And I told her, I said, Cindy, this is all your mom and I got in you. It's $5.25.
I always wondered how you were in Ansted and Jean was in Nuttall.
Do what?
When Jean was in Nuttall, right? She went to Nuttall and you went to Ansted.
Well,
That's pretty
it was
far
strange. The boys in Ansted, for some reason, wanted a girlfriend to look at. And the boys that look at wanted a girlfriend from Ansted. Oh, me. You got anything else you want
But
to ask
since
me?
we're delivering babies, you might as well tell the story about Joe Adams. You don't have to tell any names.
I won't tell the names. But I was 18 years old, and a fellow by the name of Joe Adams worked for Thomas Funeral Home. And he called me one night and said, Bob, would you come go with me? He said, I got a lady that's going to have a baby, and I would like for you to go with me. Well, we got down on Gauley Mountain, and that's as far as we got. He had to deliver that baby. The escalator said, "Do you think we should take you back on to the hospital?" She said, "Oh no, take me home." He took one of his shoestrings. I probably shouldn't tell this.
That's how it works.
He took one of those shoestrings out of his shoe and tied the navel cord.
Mhm.
Now that was 60-some years ago. Well, it so happened I ran into the lady that he delivered. She knew I was there
When she was born.
when she was born. She said, "Bob, you can't guess what I found." I said, "After my mother died." I said, "What?" He said, "Joe Adams' shoestring."
Oh my gosh.
She had saved
That's so funny that you'd say that, because I was just reading an article the other day that they had delivered a baby on the side of the road, and the man was hollering for a shoestring. And the nurse said she handed him one. She said, "I knew exactly what you was going to do with it." So I guess that was a common thing back in the day.
Well, I hope you two girls have learned something from us old folks here tonight, have you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Something you can pass on when you get married and have children. You can tell them about the story about the old folks in Ansted.
The shoestring story.
See, you should have brought the rest of those pictures and you had those.
Do what?
You should have brought the rest of those pictures.
I have a stack of pictures this tall, but I just.
I have a feeling we've just scratched the surface with you. So
Oh, you don't want me back?
hopefully
No.
we can get you
Y'all
back
done.
again.
Y'all done got all my brain power.
What
Everything
do
I
y'all
knew.
think?
you
Should
got
we
it.
have him come back again sometime? We can talk him
And
into it.
we need to see